Hello and welcome to MAA. This is week 7 part 1 and today we're going to be looking at planning and operational variances, presented as always by Dr. Martin Roberts. Okay, so where does this all come from? Well, it comes from this basic premise that I've talked about this semester, this idea of budgets. And we started very simply with actual versus budget, what you actually spent against what you planned to spend, and ultimately you create a variance. And that variance can be either favourable or adverse. For example, if you spent too much, the variance is adverse. It's as simple as that. Okay. So what we then move on is we hear this term variances, but all that is we're just exploring throughout the income statement greater levels of variances. And what we recognise when we're looking at these variances is that when you set a budget, it's a point in time. And especially in manufacturing, that point in time will be based on a certain volume. So therefore, to create an accurate representation of what's going on, you need to change your budget so that you compare against the right actual spend. So the way that you do that is you do actual versus flexed. And what we mean by that, again as it shows you on the slide, is that we have actual, that's what you actually spent, versus your actual volume times by your standard cost. So each unit that you produce will have a selling price per unit, and it will have costs attributed to it per unit. And you use that to create your budget, your new flex budget. And again, all that happens is that you still create variances that will be favourable or adverse. Okay? And in terms of what variances we specifically focus upon, within level 4 is that you certainly start to do these 4 main ones. Sales, you're looking at turnover and volume. Materials, you're looking at price and usage. Labour, you're looking at rate and efficiency variances. And finally, we're doing expenditure and volume with fixed. Now don't forget, fixed is on the basis of OAR, which is our overhead absorption rate. And so what you've got to be careful with that one is just that your terminology changes. You have over and under absorbed, and that is part of the language of management. Is that if you think about it, especially here, is that you're trying to create your product as cheaply as possible. So that means that you try to maximize your volumes. So therefore, going as quickly as you can is great news, and you would be overabsorbed. If you go too slowly, then you would be underabsorbed. Likewise, if you had a large amount of expenditure greater than budget, then you would be underabsorbed. Okay. So moving on to the next one is that what we realized is that these particular variances could be broken down into mix and yield. And really, where we're looking at mix and yield is the volume, usage and efficiency variances really is where mix and yield normally appear. Okay. And so the ones I've found in industry and the ones you need to really get your heads around are sales mix, which is exploring how, although you might have sold the same number of units, if you sold them in different proportions with different margins attached to those proportions, you would get a different profit result. So sometimes when you go into industry and your placements or your graduate job, you will hear this idea of mix has affected our profitability, and that's talking about the mix of what we made and sold. Where else mix and yield is very strong is, like I said, is in materials, and that's very much again looking at, for want of a better word, the recipe, what it takes to make that product, and the yield is what came out of that change in the recipe that you made? Did you get more units out for changing it, or did you get worse because there was more wastage? So the good news is that we can create even more management information by looking at planning and operational variances. They're not difficult, and like it says there, is it creates more information, and really all they're doing is they're examining, is there a problem in our planning, and could it be that it's not our planning that's the problem, but is it when we actually undergo our operations or our sales? Are we not doing well from purely what we're doing, or is it purely because of our planning problems? Okay, so where planning and operation is used a lot is it's used in sales, materials and labour. And the good news is that every one of these variances has potentially a planning and operational variance associated with it. And what we'll do is in turn we'll go through each one, and certainly this will be the case when you look at the lecture exercise that's attached to this series. That's the Word document. Okay, so like I said, it's not particularly difficult. And what happens is, for a planning variance, to create a planning variance, is all that you do is you compare your actual budget to your revised budget. So your original budget was your original plan, but just before you decided to act or create some actuals or to spend or to sell anything or to make anything, you might have got some information that makes you want to change your budget. So what happens is that you revise your budget. You find out that it's going to cost you more to do a certain action. So you compare your original budget against what might be your new plans. And then the operational is what happens then is you actually then compare your actual performance against your revised budget. So you've got new data that you can compare against. So again, let's use the cinema. You were expecting it to cost you £20. Then what you realised was that they didn't offer a student discount on the hours that you planned to go. So you realised that your costs are going to increase. So therefore, your plan wasn't well thought out and it's cost you money. But then what you do is you then compare you go to the cinema anyway, and you compare your actual results against this new information that you received. How much did it then cost you to go to the cinema compared to that revised budget? Okay. So moving on, the nice thing when you, if this is set as an exam question, is that you can check your workings. Is that all of this breaks down. So let's just have a look at this. You can create a total materials variance. You can compare actual versus actual at standard. Then you can break down into price and usage variance. And then the price variance will break down into a planning and operational variance. And the usage variance will break into a planning and operational variance. Once you've calculated them all, then the variances will add back to the overall variance. Okay, and so it's going to look like that. So what you've got is at the top, I've calculated the total material variance. I know what it stands as. And then I've got my material price variance and I've got my usage variance. So those two will add back to that. Then what will happen is your material price will add back to your planning and operational variance. So there you go, x plus x will give you 2x's, which will take you back to your material. And all that you're doing is, like I said, is you're comparing your budget against your revised and your actual against your revised. Now the thing to be wary of here is if your revised is a bigger number than your budget. It's the other way around to how you used to see me present my variances. So a lower number here and a higher number here in revised will mean that you've not thought it through properly and it's cost you money. So like going to the cinema, you were thinking you had a budget of 20 quid, £20, then you realised, it's actually going to cost me 25. That would be a negative variance. Okay, so again, for completeness, material usage of 2x's will add up to the 1x each of the planning and operational. So you go through the same idea. Okay, so in material price, you're looking at pounds. In material usage, you're obviously looking at kilograms or litres or whatever it is in the question when it's talking about usage. And the good news is we will do exactly the same for a labour variance. So I think the best thing to do now is that we will stop this video now and we will move on to going through the lecture exercise that you can find associated with this lecture series. Okay, take care and I will see you in the next video.